Therapists of Reddit. What was your biggest "I know I'm not supposed to judge you but holy SHT" moment? Once had a patient whose wife shook their baby to death. He wanted help reconnecting with his wife. At the time I was a young father of a newborn myself. And he triggered a lot of fear in me for my own child. A deep loathing of his spouse. And pity, the how pathetic kind, for the patient. I tried for 3 sessions. Met his spouse and everything before handing the case over to my supervisor, who knew about my initial reactions. And tried to help me through it. Unfortunately, it ended up being more about my feelings than his. And I was new to the profession at the time. These things are expected to crop up from time to time. But I was still taken aback by my own reactions. I do acute pediatric inpatient behavioral therapy. Has never happened with a child. And never will. Parents, on the other hand, can be real pieces of speep. And the way they treat/abuse their children, then throw them off on us and scream fix them. I'm a big burly guy and I've cried many nights over this. I was once in my psychiatrist's office, see a bi-monthly. 15 minutes med check. She asked me what was going on more as conversation. I told her that in the last 6 weeks, my 3 elders and 2 uncles I was guardian/conservator for had died one right after the other. My wife had a heart attack. My daughter attempted suicide. And my mom broke her hip and had laid on her floor for a week before being found. She drank and ate from the dog's bowls. I got that call within 10 minutes of setting up the last funeral. She stopped the meeting, got on the phone with the therapist in the office next to her, and had her postpone her next meeting to speak with me. I was so beeped up. I had no idea. I think she saved my life. When a convicted pedophile client told me, "Nothing gets me going like a pair of little girls' worn panties," you better believe I judged the beep out of him. I continued to work with him and I treated him with compassion and respect because he's a human being worthy of both. I did my job because I'm a professional. But I can't honestly say that I didn't judge him. I judged that he should never be around children. I judged that he is not yet ready for change. I judged that his access to his own daughter should be closely supervised. That's a lot of judgments. Understanding your own inherent biases and how they influence your work is a very important part of training and practice. As the pandemic worsened here in the US and more lockdowns are on their way, one of my most extroverted clients and I brainstormed ways to meet her social needs while remaining safe. The following week she cancelled her session and told me that she's positive for COVID after attending an orgy. Which definitely wasn't one of our ideas. I let out the deepest, most defeated sigh after I hung up the phone. I work with youth and adolescents who have anxiety, trauma, and/or depression. Some of the kids I worked with had some pretty severe attachment issues. Regardless of this, I never thought I'd have to seriously explain. 1. You can't just buy a straitjacket for your kid. 2. Feeding your kid ultra spicy ramen each night instead of the meal everyone else is eating isn't specifically defined as abuse. But you have to understand the emotional abuse that this causes. 3. Your kid isn't trying to kill you because they stand in your doorway at night crying. That's likely because they're scared of their traumatic nightmares. But feel like you will just yell at them if they wake you up. Clinical psychologist working primarily in forensics here. This means my clients are usually involved in legal proceedings, family court, juvenile court, criminal court, etc. My job is usually to evaluate or provide treatment. I'm not there to judge. That's the judge's job. But of course I have my thoughts. I am usually impressed by the justifications people make for speepty behavior. The one that irks me the most is when parents manipulate their child against the other parent. I've had to do therapy for a 5-year-old who said she doesn't want to see a parent because they haven't paid child support. Excuse me? What 5-year-old knows, understand, or needs to be worried about child support? Just checking in that nobody wrote my story. When I was underage, I got caught with a drink on Bourbon Street and got a minor in possession. I was telling my therapist about it, and said that the police caught me with a hand grenade in New Orleans. He didn't realize that a hand grenade was a type of drink. And it was funny to watch him try to process that his patient might have just casually told him that he had been caught with a fragmentation grenade. He took a big long pause, and said, "Where did you even find a grenade?" I realized the misunderstanding quickly and corrected him. But for a moment he definitely was thinking, holy speep, how do I deal with this? I work in mental health and have worked in acute and crisis settings for the majority of my career. The most notable event I experienced was when a young person had presented with significant ongoing suicidal ideation who was dealing with a lot of SPEEP. I spent a lot of time with them, mostly de-escalation and working out what the plan should be moving forward. One of their parents came in a little while later and I had the opportunity to speak to them about where their child was and what had been going on. With their consent, of course. Midway through me trying to explain some of the psychological constructs and ways the parent could help, they said to me, "Is this going to take much longer? I have a show to go and watch." Well, I quit my last therapist because I made him cry uncontrollably. He tried not to, but he just couldn't hold it back. I felt guilty and won't see him anymore. I think he may have lost a child before. I described watching my aunt grieve over her son's body. I felt so much pain losing him, but was explaining how watching my aunt was dramatically worse. The details about her is what made him lose it. I could tell he was reliving something inside his own head. Patient side here. I had been seeing a therapist for a few months to help with chronic depression and self-harm with some pretty intense suicidal ideation. I had tried Suprax in the past. Didn't like the side effects and put it down. But I was ready to try something new to supplement therapy. Everyone within earshot was calling Wellbutrin a miracle and lifesaver. So I figured I'd give it a shot. Since my therapist couldn't prescribe drugs, I got an appointment with a psychiatrist. My first appointment, I explain what I've got going on, what I'm doing to work on it, and what I'm looking for in seeing him. I do a pretty good job holding myself together in public. I dress myself. I hold down jobs. At that point I lived on my own, now living with my partner. All in all, I've got a well-polished mask. I guess it's too good. Because pretty early in our session he looked at me and said, "I don't think you're depressed. Bro. This is the first time we met. I've been here for 20 minutes. And you're ready to reverse my diagnosis? Cool, bro." I work in healthcare and I've never heard a therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist judge patients openly. Other nurses and doctors, on the other hand, holy speep. At some of the clinics I've been in, the conversations in the break room and at the nurses' station blew my mind. I'll never judge someone, especially someone who has come to me hurting. The world is full of ass peeps already. That said, I found out while I was still doing internships that I'm very uncomfortable working with abusers. So I don't do it. It took one recount of a man describing in detail how he was strangling his wife up against a wall and making her look at the beam he was gonna hung her from. I got out of the office and told my supervisor I just couldn't do it. It's worth mentioning, I was just an observer back then. I didn't act as the therapist. My supervisor was. She wanted me to be prepared to work not only with victims, but with victimizers as well. During my training I was asked how would you feel if a client were to come to you and admitted they were a pedophile that was on the edge of committing seriously horrific acts? Could you see that person as another human being that needed help? Or were your personal feelings about the abhorrent behavior too strong? This factor leads some people to not continue my course on to the next level. But it really illustrates the level of non-judgment needed in this field. We all have our own personal feelings. Of course. But these get talked about in supervision. I've never judged my patients. My co-workers, however. I've judged the speep out of those. I'm also judging the hell out of myself for picking up smoking again. But my patients? Never. Therapist. People need understanding and empathy to work through their challenges. Therapist brain. Except for you. You piece of speep. Therapist. Except for me. I'll share this though. I do feel concerned about this recent phenomenon of young people I worked with self-diagnosing, sharing, and identifying very closely with mental illness. As if the pendulum quickly swung from never ever share your feelings to OMG. You're depressed? All of us are too. Life's challenges can be tough and they don't need a scientific sounding label to be valid and real. You are not your diagnosis. We can find validation and support in healthier ways. Not a therapist but a patient. Me and my fiancé at the time went in to see if we could figure out how to make things work after he hit me. After our history came out and I divulged his infidelity etc. The therapist basically said no. There's no hope. You need to get help for yourself so you can get the courage to leave and end this. I was angry at the time but both therapists knew there was no point as he was as screwed up as it gets. I just wanna show up when some low-effort text-to-speech channel covers this. Can I answer from the other side? I had something close to a mental breakdown after a painful breakup. Started seeing a therapist. It was going more or less well. At one point I had a sort of revelation about all my bull's peep and about my own responsibility in the whole mess. So next session I'm actually thrilled to share this with the therapist. About how I finally see a bunch of my own problems in the way I interact with women. And which caused a relationship that wasn't really healthy from the get-go. I'm halfway through trying to explain this and the therapist goes, "Oh. You know. Women are weird." So that was that. I never went back. Okay. Real therapist here. I got one. Some of my clients are shockingly bad at giving themselves credit. Holy speep. Like they might get a nearly straight A GPA in a brutal major while battling depression. Or overcome years of phobia and get behind the wheel again. Or write a literal novel. Or raise a kid as a single parent with low income. Or build new relationships after being burned. Or cope with OCD well enough to hold down a job. And they'll talk about themselves as if everyone on earth is better than them. As if their accomplishments are worthless. And I know it's because of depression or anxiety or another condition. But I'm often stunned by how differently I see them compared to how they see themselves.